Welcome everyone, Your Excellencies, dear speakers, dear guests. I am Lazarus, Policy Advisor for Social and Economic Affairs at COMECE, and I am very happy to welcome you all to this webinar, Listen to the Cry of the Poor, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and its recovery. As you know, COMECE is the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the EU, and this event is taking place on the occasion of the 5th World Day of the Poor that was instituted by Pope Francis. It is also following from a statement of the COMECE Social Affairs Commission on poverty that was released 1 month ago. A few logistic remarks before we start properly. This event is a webinar, so you can see it happens in a hybrid meeting. We have here at COMECE, next to me, I have several speakers and also some members of the Social Affairs Commission. And we have other speakers that are connected online and that are highlighted so we can see you very well. So there will be a Q&A session later. So if you have some questions, you can ask them in a Q&A box. And the physical members who are present can also raise their hands. So the timing will be a bit tight. We'll try to keep a strict eye on the watch. And for that, I am happy to have a bit of help tonight, Théophile. He will raise a yellow flag to tell you that you should please come to your conclusion, and the red flag if you are over time. So please keep an eye on the timing. Yes, and please note that this event is recorded and it will be shared on our social media. So thank you very much. And before we start with our panel discussion, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Patrizia Toia, member of the European Parliament's Intergroup on Fighting Against Poverty. She kindly accepted to send a personal video address, so we are very happy to hear that now. So it will just take 1 minute for the logistic part.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be present at the initiatives promoted by COMECE, even if, unfortunately, this time only by video message. But I am sure there will be plenty of opportunities in the future to meet and discuss in person, I hope strongly. First of all, let me extend my warmest greetings to the Secretary General, Manuel Enrique Barrios Prieto, and to Archbishop Enrique Antoine Eduardo, President of your Social Affairs Commission, who worked on the Declaration on Poverty, which you will present today in the occasion of the World Day of the Poor. Greetings also to the other distinguished speakers. I have carefully read the document you have prepared, and I must tell you that I was positively surprised by the clear analysis of the situation on poverty and social exclusion in Europe, as well as the European strategies deployed to this end over the past years. The final recommendations you suggest to the European institutions are a precious source which I will surely share with my other colleagues, and I promise you that goal I will do. Clearly, clarity is crucial, in fact, and very clear are the figures. Before COVID, 1 in 5 people in the EU and 1 in 10 workers were at risk of poverty, and over 25 million people were in clear material difficulties. This is alarming, as the situation only got worse over the past year. But one figure in particular struck me most. 44 million people and families at risk of energy poverty is a new poverty, the energy poverty in our world. The pandemic crisis and the rising energy prices are the biggest problem in the EU right now. we cannot allow that number I mentioned to rise up or remain unchanged. That is why we have put this point in our proposal to face the issue of energy poverty in our energy policies. Our duty now is to help the neediest households who must certainly not be crushed twice by the pandemic crisis and the inflation on the one hand, and the energy and by the energy transition toward the decarbonization in the other hand. It is also more clear that the pandemic has worsened and multiplied situation of extreme fragility from every point of view: food insecurity, difficulty to access to health care, economic inequalities, precarious or underpaid jobs, high level of debt, and so on. Not to mention the so-called invisible, the homeless, the undocumented women and the girls exposed to the domestic violence, the disabled, asylum seekers and the migrants. As I have had the opportunity to witness, there are all categories which have received help and support of any kind by Catholic organizations and other religious organizations too, especially during lockdowns. These organizations committed to provide material assistance, psychological help, or simply to stay by the persons most in need in moments of deep loneliness and uncertainty. I strongly believe in what you stated in your document. It is important to have the poor at the center in an integral vision of human development. We and all the European institutions must set out on this path too, and I strongly hope that will happen. And we have now we have the means. In this time we have the means to face these difficulties. As you have described it well in the document, using the fund from Next Generation EU, added to multi-annual budget, we have an unprecedented portfolio of 1.8 trillion euros. Regarding the Next Generation EU and the related different national plans, I want to remind everyone that the EU has set 3 priorities on Next Generation EU. One is green transformation, the second is digitalization, and the third is in social inclusion and resilience for society. But very often the majority of people, and sometimes we all, only remember the first 2 points. This is our only chance to finally put on the ground the ambitious goal of the social pillar, social pillar, including a renewed impetus for the social economy, on which we are working hard now to provide in EU with a future-proof action plan that will be presented in December. This is a work that I promise to monitor and push for in the appropriate fora in EU institutions. We need a more socially minded Europe than it is. Economic growth also needs a good level of social inclusion and security in order to be more resilient. However, let me be clear too. All these efforts must also see a broadening of perspective towards other regions of the world, the entire world, that are seeing much more difficult situation than us. Putting ethics and fairness at the heart of international relations, as you rightly point out in your recommendations, is fundamental, especially when it comes to access to vaccines, for instance, where we unfortunately see an increase in inequalities. Let me conclude by expressing my gratitude for your work and attention to these topics that too often risk being overshadowed by other pressing issues and emergencies. Our job as a member of the European Parliament is to make sure poverty-related issues are never overlooked. I therefore reiterate my commitment and openness to collaborate with you all.
All right. So then I was just sorry for the technical disruption. I was just thanking Mrs. Patrizia Toia for this welcoming speech, welcoming address that has taken on board some of our recommendations, including on energy poverty, on digitalization and access to services. And now I am happy to give the floor to the Association Lazarus Belgium. We have here with us Thomas Kai, who will present our guest of honor tonight, Thierry. And Thierry, you will deliver a personal testimony about your experience having dealt with difficult situations in life. And Thomas, you will kindly translate. So please be patient. There will be a translation in live on this channel. Stay on this channel and you will have the translation step by step. Many thanks to both of you for coming, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're both from the Lazarus Association. It's an association which was set up in France about 10 years ago, which brings together young people who work and people who've experienced some form of precarity, whether that's incarceration, homelessness, or some sort of destitution. We share daily life together. In a house, there's always a parity between half young people working, half people coming out of precarious living. Here in Brussels, for example, we are about 20 people. There's a men's house, a women's house, about 10 each, in which there's this parity is respected. In the project, there's also always families who live next door. So here there are 2 families in Brussels which accompany the project. Thierry and I have been housemates for the last 2 years in the house, and we organise daily life together along with our personal work and other activities. So I'll give the floor now to Thierry and I'll interpret into French, from French. En français, tu peux.
Bonjour à tous, je me nomme Thierry, je suis un colloque de Lazare depuis 3 ans. Mais bon, je vais d'abord commencer au début. J'avais une vie, j'avais 30 ans de carrière derrière moi. Pendant cette carrière, pendant mes 30 ans de carrière, j'avais un logement dans le passé. Qui, malheureusement, en 2013, et ça en viendra après.
So, hello, my name is Thierry. I've been a housemate in Lazare for the last 3 years. I had a 30-year-long career, and I had my own apartment, place where I was living. Unfortunately, though, in 2013, I lost all of this.
La durée de mon logement, c'est de 84 à 2013. Pendant ces années-là, de 84 jusqu'à 89, j'ai fait divers métiers dans la manœuvre. Tous les métiers que j'ai faits, c'est dans la manœuvre, jusqu'en 89, où j'ai eu la chance de passer mon permis poids lourd. C'était le but, c'était de pouvoir devenir routier. Donc j'ai 22 années d'expérience derrière moi. Sur ces 22 années d'expérience, j'ai fait d'abord 7 ans de livraison en matière combustible inflammable. Donc c'est mazout, gasoil, essence. Pour d'abord un sous-traitant pendant 1 an de SO, et après j'ai eu la chance d'avoir trouvé du travail chez un autre sous-traitant de CK à l'époque.
So during these different times, from 84 to 2013, I had lots of different jobs. I was fortunate enough to receive training to become a heavy goods lorry driver, and I was driving around dangerous goods, flammable material, which I did for 7 years.
Okay. Après ça, en 98, j'ai eu un licenciement de mon dernier transporteur en premier inflammable. Je suis passé directement du national dans l'international, où là j'ai 12 ans de carrière, d'expérience derrière moi, ce qui m'a permis de quand même avoir eu la chance de faire le métier que je voulais, en sachant que c'est un des métiers dans le domaine ouvrier les plus dangereux, parce que vous avez déjà entendu par les médias que dans le passé, régulièrement, il y avait des accidents. Moi-même, je l'ai vécu de ma vie. Sur 12 ans d'international, je suis passé 7 fois à côté de la mort. Donc, cette fois, il y a eu un miracle. Donc, je peux remercier Dieu énormément. J'ai énormément de reconnaissance vis-à-vis de lui. Parce que sinon, j'étais apparti avec 44 tonnes qui étaient derrière moi. Enfin, peu importe.
So unfortunately, I lost my job in working in the flammable sector. I received a job in non-flammable goods, heavy vehicle transport. I had the chance to do this job that I wanted to do, but it remained a job which is dangerous, with its own risks and difficulties. 7 times I nearly had serious accidents.
Aussi malheureusement, quand j'ai commencé à travailler dans le transport, je suis tombé, comme toute personne naïvement, dans les drogues dures, dans la dépendance des drogues dures. J'ai été dépendant de drogues dures pendant 24 années de ma vie. Ça fait 9 ans que j'ai arrêté les drogues dures vis-à-vis de l'héroïne. Je suis à ma 4e année d'abstinence vis-à-vis de la cocaïne. Je ne touche plus aux drogues dures depuis un laps de temps.
Unfortunately, when I started this work in transport, I also fell into heavy drug consumption of strong drugs, and now though for the last 9 years I haven't consumed any hard drugs.
Il faut savoir que pendant que j'exerçais ma profession, chaque fois que je partais pendant 4 jours sur la route, il n'y avait pas question de consommer. J'étais sous médication, donc j'étais à méthadone à l'époque. Je devais moi-même gérer au fur et à mesure mon méthode.
I never consumed when I was on the road. I would always be in a meditative state where I wouldn't consume, but I was on methadone for many of these years.
À cause des responsabilités que j'avais sur mes épaules. Et puis bon.
Because of the responsibilities that I was carrying.
Et puis en 2013, malheureusement, en juin 2013, c'est l'année où j'ai perdu mon dernier studio que je jouais à l'époque. Et je me suis retrouvé du jour au lendemain, comme la photo on a vu tout à l'heure, la personne qui était sur le banc. Moi, j'ai connu 3 mois de galère dans la rue, où j'ai eu la chance d'avoir deux connaissances qui étaient dans la même situation que moi. Et la nuit, on avait trouvé un endroit où on se tenait les coudes et on dormait dans des conditions effroyables, mais au moins on avait une solidarité entre nous pour avoir une sécurité aussi. Donc, le soir, malgré qu'on est à l'air libre, on dort sur des cartons, dans son sac à couchage, même s'il fait 3 degrés ou 4 degrés la nuit, vous dormez maximum 3 heures et le froid, il vous réveille. Ça, c'est d'office.
So unfortunately, in 2013, I lost the studio where I was living, and I found myself from one day to the next, just like in the photo of the poster of this event, living outside. Fortunately enough, I was with 2 people who were in similar difficult situation, but we were still supporting each other, albeit in horrible conditions, sleeping outside or in unclean places, sometimes only getting a few hours of sleep every night.
Bon. Par après, j'ai eu, dans cette période de 3 mois noirs qui s'est déroulée, j'ai eu la chance de trouver un hébergement dans une maison d'accueil pour hommes qui s'appelle l'Armée du Salut, qui est ici au centre-ville de la rue de Bouillem. Là, je suis resté quand même coincé pendant quelques années. Et pendant que je dépendais de l'armée du SAMU, je fréquentais une ASBL Oro qui est d'origine néerlandophone et qui donne un appui, un coup de main à tous les gens qui sont en retard sur l'informatique. C'est grâce à eux que j'ai pu suivre des cours d'Excel 2007, suivre des cours de néerlandais, et en même temps, c'est grâce aux responsables d'Euro qui m'ont mis en relation avec l'ancienne coordinatrice qui travaillait à l'époque, Caroline, et Charlotte, qui est la famille principale avec Vianney, c'est la famille principale de Lazare.
So after these 3 months of street homelessness, I was fortunate enough to find a place in Salvation Army hospice in Brussels. I then received some help from a day centre called Hobo here in Brussels, who put me in touch with the Lazarus Association.
Et par le biais des sages de Hobo, un jour ils m'ont proposé de venir à une réunion chez eux pour rencontrer Charlotte et Caroline, qui me proposaient spontanément de me recevoir chez Lazare, de découvrir Lazare. Et ça, c'est une nouvelle chance qui m'a été offerte. Grâce à Lazare, parce que je suis arrivé chez eux le 1er octobre 2018, avec la pandémie. Moi, j'ai eu la chance de rencontrer les anciens, les grands frères, qui sont plus jeunes que moi, mais tous ceux qui étaient présents à l'époque m'ont reçu tel quel. Le jour où j'ai été reçu chez eux, je réexpliquais qui j'étais, ce que j'avais fait, ce que je vous explique actuellement maintenant, que j'ai été dépendant des produits. Mais ce qui était magnifique avec Lazare, c'est que, bon, évidemment, il y a un règlement interne, comme partout, dans toutes les associations, c'est logique. Il y a des critères qu'il faut respecter. Bon, c'est normal, on vit en communauté, donc il y a des barrières qu'on ne peut pas passer. Mais le bonus que j'ai reçu, c'est qu'on a eu la chance de temps en temps faire des week-ends à l'extérieur. Ouais. J'ai eu la chance de pouvoir faire des voyages à l'extérieur. C'est des choses que je n'avais plus vécues il y a longtemps dans le passé. Parce que bon, à mon sujet, vous ne le savez pas, mais c'est pour quand même le signaler, c'est que malheureusement, dans ma vie, j'ai perdu 90% de ma famille. Il y a encore 10% à peu près qui sont vivants. Et en 2010, c'est mon grand frère qui est parti.
So I met in 2018 the family who were responsible for Lazarus, and the encounter went very well, and spontaneously I was invited to move in. I felt upon arrival that I was accepted as I was for who I was, despite the past that I had experienced. Something that touched me particularly about Lazare is that I was able to rediscover things that I had not experienced in a long time. For example, life with others, going on trips outside, which Thierry says is what brought a lot of life to his time at Lazare. So I think c'est fini.
Donc, je voulais juste clôturer avec de Lazare. Lazare m'a donné une chance.
Lazarus gave me a second chance in life.
Pour retrouver, me ressourcer,
to rejuvenate myself, to find a stability again,
retrouver foi,
to find faith in myself
et vis-à-vis de Dieu,
and in God,
surtout vis-à-vis de Dieu. Il n'y a que du bonus.
There's only bonuses.
Et en toute franchise, Lazare m'a donné du bonus, un coup de boost.
In all honesty, Lazarus was a big bonus for me.
Et tous les moments qu'on a pu passer ensemble, c'est des moments magnifiques.
And all the moments we spent together were fantastic moments.
Pour vous expliquer le dernier exemple, normalement, il y avait un voyage qui était prévu en 2021. On devait aller à Rome. À cause de la pandémie, ça a été reporté. Pour finir, on a eu la chance fin août. Et ça tombait en même temps que mon anniversaire. J'ai eu la chance de pouvoir, avec tout le week-end international Lazare qui se fait une fois par an, c'est Lazare qui s'occupe de la logistique. Les colos ne savent jamais à l'avance. Et j'ai eu la chance non seulement de fêter mon anniversaire à Rome, de découvrir une ville que je n'avais jamais découverte à part.
But in 2021, we were able to go to Rome for the Lazarus International meeting, and we were all together with all of Lazarus, and we met the Pope, and it was fantastic.
Oui, on termine. Et on a eu la chance d'être reçu par le pape et de pouvoir témoigner.
I was received by the Pope, and I was able to give a witness of my life to the Pope. Everything that Jay said, he said.
Many thanks, dear Thierry, for your personal testimony that truly touches our hearts. You have reminded us of the sense of solidarity, community, and faith. So thank you for your openness and for sharing this with us. And of course, thank you, Thomas, for your kind translation and being here with us. So yes, now we will move to the panel debate. We have 5 experts on the topic who will share their perspectives on how to tackle poverty. And you will have each up to 7 minutes for an introductory statement. So please keep your eyes on the flags. And we will have very few questions afterwards. So let me introduce our first panelist, His Excellency Monseigneur Antoine Héroard, Auxiliary Bishop of Lille and President of COMECE Social Affairs Commission. You are also, since 2019, the Apostolic Delegate for the Sanctuary of Lourdes, and together with the Social Affairs Commission, you have written this statement on poverty, in which you share some recommendations based on the Catholic social teaching on how the EU could continue its work to tackle poverty. Could you please introduce to us this statement on poverty, also in the context of the 5th World Day of the Poor that we celebrated yesterday, and give us some of the concrete recommendations that you are asking for?
Thank you. I would say first that in Fratelli Tutti, His Holiness Pope Francis strengthened that wealth has increased in the world, but together with inequality, with the result that new forms of poverty are emerging. In addition, the COVID-19 crisis made it very difficult to overcome a situation of poverty. We have seen that. And the number of people in poverty is expected to rise by 5% as a result of the pandemic, reaching at least 125 million people, so higher than after the 2008 crisis. In this context, the COMECE Social Affairs Commission has decided to call on the European Union institutions, on EU leaders, and on all people of goodwill to listen to the sufferings of people in poverty and take concrete action. In this statement, we acknowledge first what is the European Union doing to tackle poverty. We then also looked at what is happening on the ground. What was the reaction of the Church and its caritative network Caritas at the time of COVID to support in particular families and people in poverty. Then we identified what are the possible gaps with the EU policies and what is that we want to ask to the EU institutions. Today, I will mention only some key aspects of the Church on poverty and some of our recommendations. First, in our statement, we highlight 2 key aspects of the Church on poverty. The first one is that people suffering from poverty have to be protagonists, as we have just listened in the example of Lazare. They have much to teach us, says Pope Francis. Therefore, any reflection and action regarding fighting poverty should aim at reducing marginalization and enhancing more integral inclusion, meaning economic, social, and political participation. Pope Francis emphasized in his message yesterday that the poor are not people outside our communities, but brothers and sisters whose sufferings we should share in an effort to alleviate their difficulties and marginalization, restore their lost dignity, and ensure their necessary social inclusion. The second aspect is that further work is needed to better acknowledge the multidimensional approach of poverty, to leave no one behind. Poverty cannot be encapsulated by mere monetary indicators and requires an integral approach. Already in 1967, Pope Paul VI singled out an approach to human development which ought to be integral in order to be fully human. Integral approach is also at the core of the call for an integral ecology in the Pope Francis encyclical letter Laudato Si. Here too we can quote yesterday's speech of Pope Francis. Almsgiving is occasional. Mutual sharing, on the other hand, is enduring. The former risks gratifying those who perform it and can prove demeaning for those who receive it. The latter strengthens solidarity and lays the necessary foundations for achieving justice. And I believe this is exactly what you are trying to achieve at the Association Lazare. Let me now go through some of our recommendations in our statement on poverty. The first one, as an immediate action, we called on member states to make full use of the EU funding to strengthen material and food assistance, as well as to support youth employment. It is essential to make sure that the fund supports those most in need, including families in poverty, but also women and single parents who have particularly suffered from the pandemic. Second one, we ask for a better measure of poverty with criteria that matches with the present realities, including in-work poverty and the lack of access to energy, also green energy, or to decent housing. These criteria should be well monitored over time to guarantee an efficient social system and to end homelessness in the European Union by 2030. Third one, we called for better prevention of over-indebtedness and poverty traps, notably by promoting better and accessible financial education, and to ensure that quality debt counseling service is made available to all. Fourth recommendation, we ask for a dignified life through work and a dignified salary, and to close the gender pay gap. The situation of platform workers should be particularly looked after. A flexible work should not mean a precarious work. 5 point. We ask for a boost in intergenerational solidarity, in particular to prevent old age poverty and guarantee a dignified life for the elderly through an effective public social security and intergenerational solidarity. In addition, a fair responsibility sharing is needed over time across the generations to recover from the pandemic, and the younger generation should not be left behind in repaying the borrowing from the recovery. 6, we call for quality education for all children and to tackle the digital divide. 7, foster integral and multidimensional approaches that recognize the true value of the poor and promote their effective participation in our society. EU policies should recognize better the specific needs of each of these persons and give them an effective voice. 8, we called on all economic and financial actors to develop a humanitarian sense in social responsibility and to encourage private investment to tackle poverty. 9, the COVID-19 pandemic affected people in poverty in a disproportionate way. This is why we call to act as a human family to support poor countries globally and to promote vaccine equity to tackle the pandemic. The Pope insisted yesterday that it is especially urgent to offer concrete responses to those who are unemployed, whose numbers include fathers, mothers, and young people. In conclusion, it is urgent to offer concrete responses to all persons affected by poverty, to listen to their sufferings, and to give them an effective voice. We should not wait for people suffering from poverty to knock on our doors, but to rather urgently reach them in their homes, hospitals, on the streets, and develop concrete measures with them to alleviate their sufferings and marginalization. At the same time, we should bear in mind Pope Francis' words of yesterday. There are many forms of poverty among the rich that might be relieved by the wealth of the poor, if only they could meet and get to know each other. This is very important, I think. None are so poor that they cannot give something of themselves in mutual exchange. We too are poor because only in this way will we truly be able to recognize them, to make them part of our lives and an instrument of our salvation, says the Pope. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Your Excellence, for this enriching presentation about some of the recommendations of the Social Affairs Commission, and also for highlighting some important words of Pope Francis on the occasion of the 5th World Day of the Poor. So I am now pleased to introduce our next speaker, Her Excellency Marie-Louise Colero-Preca. In 2014, you were elected President of Malta, a position that you occupied until 2019. We are very honored to have you here today at COMECE. Of course, you have had a long political career behind you. Previously, you were a member of Parliament in the House of Representatives of Malta, and you have served as Minister of the Family and Social Solidarity. Today, on top of other functions, you are also the President of Eurochild and the Chair of the Malta Foundation for the Wellbeing of Society. You are also a distinguished member of the Social Affairs Commission. We are very much looking forward to hearing your recommendations on how to tackle poverty, and in particular, child poverty. So please, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Alex, Your Excellency, and colleagues. First of all, I feel very privileged to be amongst you, and also very honored to have this opportunity to speak in particular on child poverty. Because many a time we speak about poverty, but very rarely we focus on children. Children seem to be invisible. And I would like to start with a quote from, I left all the quotes of Pope Francis to you, more adapt, but I bring a quote here from Professor Philip Alston, who was a former UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. And he says, poverty is a political choice, and its elimination requires tackling inequality, implementing universal social protection, and embracing participatory governance. And I do believe that this is a political choice. I come from my other life, from the political world, given the right policies in place and the right political will and political determination to implement and to act, no one should be poor, no one should be left behind, especially in this part of the world, which is one of the wealthiest regions in the world. So as the world continues to face one of the widest spread and devastating pandemics in recent time, the number of people living in poverty and social exclusion has increased, as we all know. However, it must be acknowledged, these numbers were not low before the pandemic, and it is children who are most vulnerable and being impacted the most. And this is also from research from UNICEF, OECD. Well, data also shows this. In 2018, nearly 20 million children were at risk of poverty. According to Eurostat, the latest statistics show an average increase of almost 2 percentage points of child poverty or social exclusion in the European Union. These figures are for 2020. They show that 42.2% of children less than 18 years old in the European Union were at risk of poverty or social exclusion, compared with nearly 22% of adults 18 to 64, and 20.4% of older people 65 or over, demonstrating that children have been impacted the most by COVID-19. In a recent report published by Eurochild, which is called Growing in Lockdown, children have spoken about the hardship of the pandemic. Children have spoken how they have become even more vulnerable. And they have given examples of the issues that the lockdowns not only restricted them from their learning, but also from their school lunches. So it is not just, it has highlighted the digital divide, His Excellency has mentioned it, the educational divide, and issues of mental health. These were some of the highlights by children when they spoke through this report, Growing in Lockdown. So what is Eurochild's position and focus? Children are living in poverty around the world. Poverty is not just a problem for people living in developing or least developed countries. It is a situation that is having a major impact on the lives of people around the globe, including children in every member state of the European Union and Europe. Eurochild wants to see an end to child poverty in Europe. We believe child poverty needs to be tackled through a rights-based approach. This approach recognizes the child as an individual rights holder, whilst understanding that a child's development is dependent on the family, on the school, and on the community environments in which they grow up in. We therefore advocate for systemic reforms that address structural inequalities and prioritize public investment in education, healthcare, housing, family support, and in early child development and care. Eurochild believes poverty is best addressed in a child's earliest years. We therefore advocate for all families, in particular those facing disadvantage, to receive the necessary support before their children are of school age, including access to adequate financial resources. And this is very important. The early childhood development and care is so crucial. Children at a disadvantage at the point in time in their life will keep on being disadvantaged. And this can be shown in particular at the start of their formal education. I always like to go a step even further than that. We need to have maternal services because very strong maternal services and accessible to all, due to the fact that at that point in time in a woman's life, in a potential mother's life, we have a window of opportunity whereby we can address vulnerability at that very point. If we have a potential mother who is suffering from mental health issues, then the child will come into the world in a very vulnerable environment. I already have the flag, so I think I will have to cut short. And I'll move on to recommendations and then I can refer if there are any questions. So what are our recommendations? First and foremost, we must set national targets to reduce child poverty, to tackle social inequalities and ensure the post-pandemic needs of children are addressed. The social pillar action plan, we've mentioned it a lot of times this evening, sets a specific target to lift at least 5 million children out of poverty by 2030 across the European Union. But we should be much more ambitious. We're speaking of 18 million children at risk of poverty and social exclusion. What will happen with those 13 million other children? Well, I have to stop here. I had also the red flag now. In a minute, the president will tell me to go in the yard. So I'll stop here, but I hope I will have the opportunity to continue. But I want to end with this. No country in the European Union can boast of not having child poverty, no matter how high its GDP is and how strong its welfare systems are. So we're all in the same boat and we need to be together. And it is not fair on the church, I must add this, because expecting governments, the church is doing a lot. I can tell from Malta, Caritas is there in every corner of difficulties and challenges. But that is not enough. Governments have to pull up their socks. The poor have waited too long. Thank you.
Many thanks, Your Excellency, for this rich contribution on how to tackle child poverty and the many issues you have mentioned, the digital divide, the need of public investments in education and healthcare, the need for strong maternal assistance and services, and the fact that we need to be more ambitious. So our next speaker now, Mr. Andrew Holohan, I see he's connected online. You come from the network ATD Force Word and you are based in Ireland, Dublin. Many thanks for joining us today. You are a young father of 2 lovely children, and you are also a community activist with ATD Ireland. So a community activist is someone who has experienced difficult situations and knows hardship, yet stands up and speaks out not only for themselves, but also for others. You have recently spoken on behalf of ATD Ireland to 2 ministers in Ireland, campaigning for socioeconomic discrimination to be recognized by Irish equality law. You have also addressed social work students at Trinity College Dublin and as part of the Poverty Aware Practice module. In addition, you are a poet, I hear, and you were recently published in a new poetry book, Lockdown Liberties. So please, the floor is yours and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Andrew from ATD Ireland, and thank you for this opportunity to address the room full of people who can and do make a difference. I'm 28 years old. I have had struggles at times in my life. The trauma of losing my mom at an early age led me into addiction. I found some real positive support back then, and I got through all that. Now I am a proud father of 2 great kids and married to a wonderful woman. I'm here today as a community activist from ATD Ireland because I believe change is possible. I really want a better Europe and a more just world for my kids, without such poverty and open socioeconomic discrimination. We need to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. As we all know, the last 18 months was a difficult time for many people, particularly those who had felt excluded and were dealing with persistent struggles and worries even before this pandemic. They felt more than ever left behind. One of our projects in Ireland during the lockdown was to create an online writing group where people could share writing hopes and aspirations. It restored hope for people to be able to express themselves in a creative way through writing. We were liberated from isolation and distracted from poverty. The reason I use the word distracted is that poverty is consistent, and the writing set us free from our prisons of our mind. I want to share a link to our poems in the chat, and it's just shared there now. And this is a bit of one of the poems. It's called Transparent. Your constant mocking echoes again and again. If only silence let peace begin. Eradicate your torment with a swipe of my pen. A little trick learned while confined to a cell. How the beauty of poem in a poem can free one from hell. This lockdown project supported me to be here today and speak out. Finding strength and confidence to speak out is essential and an early step in any real partnership for creating change. This should not be overlooked. What does it mean to live in poverty? Poverty is not being able to smell the flowers because the stress of life gets in the way. The simple sentence makes us very aware of many of the issues facing people living in poverty. Is a multi-dimensional issue, a lot more complex than only financial. We are facing multiple challenges simultaneously. I would like to share a link in the chat to a 3-year piece of international research by ATD Fort Worth and Oxford University, The Hidden Dimensions of Poverty. This research clearly highlights key dimensions of poverty and is the second link there in the chat. One dimension of poverty, unrecognized struggles, skills, and contributions, is especially important, and it is also mentioned in the statement of COMECE Social Affairs Commission in Recommendations 8. Foster integral and multidimensional approaches to recognize the true value of the poor and promote their effective participation in our society. Yet we prefer to use the term people with an experience of poverty. This dimension is a key principle. I know it from my own experience. When I was young, I was written off by many due to my situation with addiction. But now I have defied all the odds. Now I have the skills and experience because of the struggles I went through. I've recently spoken to Irish ministers Roderick O'Gorman and Joe O'Brien about socioeconomic discrimination, just to build awareness of the need of the 10th round in equality legislation. All too often, people's skills are not recognized and even ignored. This is prejudice and discrimination. It results in people in poverty feeling they are treated like lesser human beings. For too long, we have not had a genuine seat at the tables of power. When I say genuine, I am referring to having our voices, ideas, and aspirations heard, listened to, and acted upon. But people with direct experience of poverty should be recognized as experts on poverty and should be included in any societal debate. We need to address this and maybe change the tables to be more accessible. This participation is essential, but it takes time and effort to build up the confidence to speak out. I would stand by many of the points made today in the statement of COMECE Social Affairs Commission and the recommendations highlighted. But in our view, something important is missing in the COMECE statement and maybe could be added. Discrimination is part of the poverty experience and should be addressed. When you live in poverty and you experience socioeconomic discrimination, you don't have any real protection. Even though in Ireland we have already 9 discrimination grounds in the equality legislation, we are not protected. We constantly fall through the cracks. One of our main campaigns in Ireland is to ask for socioeconomic discrimination to be brought into equality legislation. Things can't move forward until we bring in socioeconomic status as a 10th ground. I would like to share 2 short examples from Ireland and the UK. And this is about my wife. When my wife was in hospital giving birth to our first child, the first person to visit her was a social worker. And because we had a history of addiction, the social worker came down on us pretty hard. And this really made my wife afraid that our baby would have been taken away by the social worker. In the end, the social worker visited our home and everything was fine. But should this be a way you bring your first child into the world, with fear and discrimination? And the second example, the stigma and shame of living in poverty actually hurts me when I'm walking down the street. and because of my appearance, because I can't go in and buy new clothes when I feel like it, that, you know, like I actually feel people looking at me. It's not looking at me, it's actually looking at my appearance. I don't think it's fair. The effects it has on me anyway is physical and mental. The judgment hurts, the shame. It is all to me an embarrassment. We have many more real life examples like this in our Does It Only Happen to Me report on socioeconomic discrimination. So in conclusion, I would like to stress that we really need to act together for change with no one left behind and make us again feel proud of Europe and what Europe can stand for. So thank you for listening and thank you for this experience. When I said earlier that many people had written me off, I was one of them. I would have never imagined myself speaking out at an event as important as this. We are here and willing partners. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for your courageous words, for speaking out today at this webinar. You have started your presentation mentioning speaking, leaving no one behind, and you also ended it in this way. And it's very important to remind it in the time of COVID. You have also mentioned this publication of ATD Forward, Hidden Dimensions of Poverty, and you have presented some of your work as well in the lockdown poetic. So thank you for that. We will look at that carefully. And also you have mentioned the multi-dimensional approach of poverty, which is also something very important that we highlight in our report. In our statement on poverty, and you are also bringing in an additional value, which is the socioeconomic discriminations, which I think we have addressed in different ways. But thank you so much for reminding it this very important thing to us. So now I will give the floor to our next speaker, who is also online, Mrs. Shannon Foman. You have been Caritas Europa Policy and Advocacy Director since 2014. So you oversee the policy work on migration, asylum, and social policies, a very big dossier. And prior to this, you were the European Network Against Racism's Deputy Director and responsible for policy. You have also been a volunteer coordinator with the Jesuit European Volunteers in Munich and a hospice worker at Caritas Nuremberg. You have also experience as a case manager for formerly homeless adults in Chicago. And you will highlight some initiatives of the church, what the church has been doing through the Caritas network during the time of COVID, some of which are also possibly in our statement, because we have a section dedicated to that in the report. And maybe we could also mention that you are a permanent guest of the COMECE Social Affairs Commission. So we are very much looking forward to hearing the recommendations that are very dear to you and the church initiatives in this time. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. We will now be competing with the church bells that are ringing outside my apartment because it's now 6 o'clock. We'll see if they outspeak me. It's an honor to be here today and to present some more examples of the Caritas Europa network in terms of the members' engagement during the outbreak of the pandemic. Like many other actors, the Caritas members had to adapt their services to the new situation. So they've introduced several new measures and services dedicated to the most vulnerable and to those such as undocumented migrants, among others, who have not been entitled to access formal services. So many of the Caritas members have adapted their services to also be able to continue responding to the needs of their beneficiaries, adopting contingency and safety plans, and of course, modifying their responses to enable working from home, offering remote and online counseling services, adapting schedules for emergency staff. Many were actively involved in distributing essential goods, in particular food and clothing, and ensuring self-protection measures. There were many services also providing people in need of support to pay their rent and to pay their housing costs. So there was a lot of support by the Caritas member organizations to respond to the most immediate needs during the pandemic. And what was very clear from the research we've been recently doing on our most recent poverty report that has a focus on employment, but what became clear is that the members had to stop immediately what they're doing, even in regard to employment, in order to respond to the most pressing needs. And that's been evident also by the testimonies today, that it's really hard to access a job if you don't have a home or to, have a shower and things like this. So many of the examples of Caritas were already in the COMECE statement, but I wanted to add just a few more examples of what our members have done. Caritas Portugal, for instance, created a national program which provided vouchers to actually purchase food and essential goods and urgent one-off financial support upon request to pay for these essential expenses that the beneficiaries had. Caritas Italiana organized outdoor counseling and psychological assistance services and delivered meals to homes directly or by offering takeaway meals. Caritas Italiana also activated specific economic support through dedicated diocesan funds to support the most urgent expenses of beneficiaries. Meanwhile, Caritas Austria adapted its night accommodation facilities for homeless people as a result of the lockdown to enable 24-hour accommodation and safe sanitary measures. The demand for food packages increased dramatically, especially during the first lockdown, when many food distribution facilities had to shut down, and food supply offerings were adapted as well, wherever possible, and moved outdoors, moved to the locations outside to ensure enough space for everyone to collect their emergency food supplies, but also still ensure more safety precautions. Also, thanks to the generosity of local suppliers, Caritas Malta promoted the Emergency Aid Food Bank, which was consistently well-stocked to be able to assist families until their Lifeline Food Bank aid application was processed. And instead of maintaining usual visits to older people, Caritas Slovenia adapted its services due to the lockdowns and social distancing requirements and made phone calls, shared posts on Facebook, and sent personalized letters to continue to support the elderly and lonely people who would have likely otherwise remained very isolated. Over time, door-to-door assistance distribution also increased, and new forms of assistance were introduced in Slovenia, such as quarantine packages and closed distribution packages. Caritas Luxembourg also put in place a helpline funded with donations to offer help where it was most needed. The National Winter Homeless Shelter was extended beyond the cold weather season until June 2020, and its opening hours shifted from just one night accommodation, previously starting from 6 p.m. until 9 a.m., to be open up non-stop, 24/7 during the pandemic. Caritas Slovakia established at diocesan level a new shopping assistance project for seniors, since many of the people in need felt ashamed to seek help. And we heard this also from previous testimonies, that that sense of shame comes into play sometimes, as well as negative treatment towards people. But Caritas Slovakia created a kind of innovative approach by seeking out the seniors under the pretext of helping them go grocery shopping. So that was one way to support them without making it so obvious. There were many other examples, but I'll stop there because of lack of time in regard to the work that Caritas members have done during the pandemic. But I do want to highlight two more recommendations that are really important among the list. I mean, all of the COMECE recommendations are important to us, but two in particular we'd like to highlight. One is the recommendation about facilitating access to affordable and decent housing. With wealth has increased globally, inequality has grown with it, thus creating the new forms of poverty. So we call on the EU institutions to measure poverty with criteria that match present realities, including in-work poverty and the lack of access to green energy. In addition, we call policymakers for the development of a culture of gratuity and hospitality of the poor. As brothers and sisters of the same planet, we bend down to touch and heal the wounds of others. So these are the words of COMECE that need to be re-emphasized. And the other recommendation is related to the dignified life through work and closing the gender pay gap. It's vital to help the poor financially. Oh, that means my time is done, but let me just finish that quote. Helping the poor financially must always be a provisional solution in the face of pressing needs. The broader objective should always be to allow a dignified life through work. And so dignified salaries and social protection need to be afforded people when they're working so that they can pursue a life in dignity and enjoy fair working conditions, decent housing and opportunities to rebuild their lives and take advantage of all there is. I'll stop there. Thanks so much for your attention.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for bringing us a deeper comprehension of what the church has done in this time of the pandemic. And also it's very good to see that there have been new initiatives. And thank you as well for sharing with us two recommendations in our statement that are very dear to you. So we will now move to the European Commission. We have heard a lot of recommendations today, and I think that our eyes are really set to hearing what you have to say now. So what is the EU target to reduce poverty? What has been done so far? Through what new strategies and measures will the European Commission propose to meet these targets? We are very honored to have with us today Mr. Jerry Spark, Head of Unit D1 in Social Policies in the DG on Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. So you are also working on the child guarantee, and in relation with the SPC, you are supervising the development of policy guidance on social policies by fostering actions at EU level aiming at fighting against poverty and social exclusion and inequality to promote inclusive labour market participation as well as upward social convergence. So you will have 7 minutes, but I would like to remind to our participants, if they have questions, we will have time, a good time for questions, because everyone kept the timing very good. And so we will have time for some questions afterwards. So if you have any questions, please write in the Q&A box. And for the physical participants, you will also be able to just raise your hands. So yes, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and also thank you for very powerful statements that have been made by people experiencing poverty. From our part, the Commission, obviously, if we want to address poverty in its entirety, everybody needs to act on their own level. All the administrations and authorities need to be involved, and all the communities need to contribute to that goal. So what we can do at the EU level, we often provide guidance to member states. We do monitoring of what is happening on the ground. We engage in mutual learning activities among member states to make sure that they exchange good practices. We provide for coordination where we have the scope to do so. And also, last but not least, there is a lot of financial support offered by the EU budget to address issues of social inclusion, fighting poverty, and also extreme forms of poverty. But this is obviously not enough. I mean, this all needs to be translated into actions on the ground, and for this we need to have the engagement of the member states and then the regional authorities, local authorities, and etc., to make sure that all these actions trickle down and actually reach those who are in poverty or at risk of poverty. I will try to reflect briefly on, because the time is limited and it's not going to be a sort of a full presentation, but briefly on the points that were mentioned. What I liked very much was that the multidimensional nature of poverty was mentioned several times. This is something that we are very well aware of, and we try to reflect it also in our policies. We should not take this for granted, because we are also often confronted with the views that poverty is maybe issue only of income or financial indicators, but that's not the only side of the story. We always have been supporting the approach of sort of a three-legged active inclusion that couples the income support with help to integrate into the labor market and help to provide or help to be provided with adequate social services to be fully included and integrated in the society and to be able to participate. And this is something that we will certainly reflect in our upcoming initiative on minimum income. The title might be a bit misleading because it's not only about income, it's about the active inclusion in its entirety, as I mentioned, because we have promised that we will come up with a council recommendation for minimum income towards the end of next year. So this is one of the concrete initiatives, sort of at a higher policy level that we will table, and that we hope and believe will trickle down through the member states' administrations, also to help to fight poverty. What I was also glad that the Pillar Action Plan was mentioned several times. This is what we consider our framework of actions to help people be lifted out of poverty, but also improve their skills and also improve the general levels of employment. There is a specific target provided there. At least 15 million people should be lifted out of poverty by 2030, and at least 5 million of those 15 should be children. I emphasize the word "at least," and I think it very much responds to what you have mentioned. These are these numbers indicate our dedication and also the policy direction where we want to go. For example, the issue of gender equality and equal pay was mentioned. You may have also noted, and in the Pillar Action Plan, below the general employment target, there is an employment target for women, especially to make sure that they participate and earn adequate wages as well. I could not also avoid to mention the Social Porto Summit that was held this spring, and that helped to mobilize the highest political levels of the EU on the poverty and employment and skills issues. So we will certainly want to keep the momentum and help to implement all the commitments. There are a number of initiatives that are either ongoing or that will be tabled. Platform work was mentioned. I guess you are aware of that the Commission will also present an initiative to address platform work. minimum wage. This is something that was already presented, I believe it was even 2 years ago, and we're still discussing with the legislators on the follow-up. Gender pay gap, pay transparency principle, access to social protection. This is a recommendation that was provided to member states to ensure protection of those who are not usually covered by social protection systems to sort of fill the gaps. I also need to mention the Youth Guarantee Initiative that has been ongoing for some time and was even reinforced last year. Platform to fight homelessness. In December, the Commission will also come up with the action plan on social economy. And last but not least, the initiative on European Child Guarantee is, I would say, one of the sort of flagship poverty initiative that we have tabled. And what is important about this, that this is very much targeted. It is very much targeted at the most vulnerable children, and addresses the very key basic services that they should be receiving, or they should be guaranteed in their member states. So, excuse me. So this is something that we are working on many fronts, as you can see. Also, the participation of people in poverty was mentioned, and I believe it's going to be in about 2 weeks, or even less. There will be people experiencing poverty event, which we organize together with the EAPN every year. Unfortunately, last year it was not possible due to COVID restrictions, but this year we are coming back. And this is one of the platforms where we want to hear and engage with people who actually experience poverty, and let their voice be heard. One more reflection was mentioned by one of the speakers about measuring poverty, because the numbers that we are all referring to reflect the at-risk of poverty or social exclusion rate. And again, this is something that represents this multidimensional nature of poverty. It represents the fact that we do not want to look only at monetary poverty, but also at labor market attachment and integration in the labor market, and also at the provision of basic goods and services to people. This is again something that should not be taken for granted. There are also many voices that maybe we can measure poverty in a different way, but we are committed to look at the multidimensional aspect of poverty. And also, I should emphasize the relative poverty. It's not we're not talking about a certain number of dollars per day, but we are talking about the relation of income of certain groups vis-a-vis the others, how their income is reflected in the overall income of their neighbors and of their of other citizens in the same country. So this is shortly something I want to share about what we are doing and what is our scope, and I'll be looking forward to discuss later on and answer any question. And I would also maybe finish with something that many of you have mentioned, that the leaving no one behind is a motto that has often been used also by our president Ursula von der Leyen when she refers to fighting poverty and social exclusion. And this is the principle that we want to adhere to, and we would like that all our partners are engaged to follow that and help to get rid of poverty in the EU. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be glad to stay for the discussion.
Thanks a lot for your intervention. You have said quite a lot on what is the EU doing at the moment to tackle poverty, what will come next, and also reminding us this poverty target of the EU. So, and also thanks a lot for reminding us what has already been said previously in the panel, that there is not only monetary poverty. So I see at present no question in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions with the online participants, please, you can write down your question. So I will now open the floor if there are some questions in the room, perhaps. Otherwise, I also have some questions.
Only questions, or may it also be a remark?
Yes, it might be a remark as well. So yes, please, Johan Verstraeten.
Well, we have heard very interesting insights into what the multidimensional aspect of poverty is. We have heard a lot about charity and the need for immediate help. We have heard a lot about Pope Francis' idea of fraternity and direct encounter with the poor, which is important to take away the shame of poverty, which is one of the great problems with regards to poverty. However, a word that I miss in the discussion is the word social justice. In my room during the 30 years at university that I've been teaching social ethics, there's a photograph of a worker during the Great Depression in the United States in the 30s, and he claims, or he shouts, "I want work, no charity." And I think that's the point. In the tradition of the Catholic Church, there's always been a very interesting definition of social justice, which is, first of all, that everyone should be allowed to make a contribution, small contribution of justice. That means everyone, and not only an economic distribution. For example, the Roma people who make music in the street, there's a contribution to the community. However, in order to be able to contribute, one should be enabled really through education, and as Amartya Sen says, it's a matter of creating the conditions so that people can achieve something in their life, that they can participate, that can be active participants in society. And why is then social justice so important? In order to judge our institutions also in terms of what these institutions can achieve. And maybe I can also remind you, Paul Ricoeur, in one of his early writings, makes the distinction, says we have not only meeting with the other directly via charity, but there is the socius. We need also the abstract other, but who depends on the way we behave institutionally with others. And that's part of the social justice discussion. So I plead here also for, in our Catholic environment, that we should not only talk about charity, solidarity, but as the Bible does also, that is not to forget, and our Protestant friends point to that very often. Let's talk about justice.
Thanks a lot for this comment. I don't know if there are some speakers who would like to react directly on your remarks, or if there is any other question in the room. Yes.
Yeah, I would be happy to react because what was mentioned about social justice, this is something what we would call equal opportunities. And since I'm working on the child guarantee, this is the principle that that we very much would like to put forward. That ending child poverty is not only about providing financial support to parents and families, but it's also guaranteeing certain guaranteeing access to certain services that are necessary for guaranteeing equal opportunities and development of children and breaking the cycle of disadvantage. So this is something that we would very much adhere to, and this is also the language of the European Pillar of Social Rights that in many principles is saying that everybody should have a right to a certain service or benefit. If you read the different principles, it usually goes everybody should have a right to do or have a certain service. So agreement with what was said. There was also a comment that it would be great to have a legally binding framework on minimum income. Thank you. Yes, we know that it would be great, but indeed the choice of instrument is obviously a matter of a political choice. It's also a result of sort of estimation or analysis which tool could be most effective in mobilizing the relevant players, and this is something that where the consensus currently is that the recommendation, the council recommendation to member states would allow us to help to reach this goal and be ambitious in its content. But indeed, there can be many discussions and opinions about the instrument, and we are obviously aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I think there was another question in the room. Joseph, yes.
It was not a question, I was just picking up on what John said, like Johan said. Don't have the camera works, you know, when I ask why people don't have food, they call me a communist. When Mother Teresa gave food to the hungry, they call her a saint. So I think the hungry stomach is a food here and now. Meanwhile, we also need to, the social justice issue, we have to do both simultaneously. We're talking about the issue of poverty. I was thinking also the whole issue of 920 million tons of food go waste, while 600 million people go hungry. So this doesn't add up. You know, it's not because there is not enough money, not enough food in the world. There's distribution issue. So it's an issue of social justice. So it has to be discussed simultaneously. So, you know, both go hand in hand.
Yes. So, Monsignor, yes.
No, just I think your remark was a very right one. Because I think what we have moved in the church in the past years is to move from a kind of solidarity when we give something to other people, to people who have special needs, and just to do something together and to build solutions with the people in need and those who want to help them. But after, we have also to reflect always on the causes of the situation. Why did this person in such a situation? And that's why we have always to think and to reflect and to act for social justice. And we have never to forget this, this target too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And there's a room.
Yes. Her Excellency, Marie-Louise,
Yes.
when you speak about political choice, about the poverty, you use this term as a consequence of poverty or as a source of poverty? A little bit different.
Yes, yes, yes.
You understand what I say?
Yes, yes. When I speak of a political choice, I'm speaking of the lack of social justice. Policies, political decisions, that from such political decisions policies emanate, can solve the problem. And we've been mentioning here, having a living wage, a proper, decent wage, having the job opportunities, empowering our children who do not have access to hardware, for example, supplying them with hardware, to mention just a few. And these are all policies. And the reason I'm speaking of this, because we need to sort of bring this issue, because this is also a governance issue. I mean, we've been hearing of, well, and I'm very pleased that social justice has been highlighted, because yes, this is a matter of justice. I was speaking of a rights-based approach, because yes, human rights are based on social justice, on equality, you know, and all the issue of inequalities, the issue of disadvantages of underprivileged children. This is all lack of justice, and we need policies to bring together and bring to effect social justice. This is also the responsibility of governments.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Just a very short sort of intervention, because this issue of child poverty is really something that hurts. Because it's a kind of poverty that has consequences for the future.
Yes.
And my question or my reflection is, I found out this reality because preparing a conference in Spain, I looked at some statistics and I saw that this was a very worrying issue. That my question is, this sometimes is not so visible, no? Or maybe our societies in Europe are not very aware of this kind of poverty.
The problem is that children are invisible. Many a time they are invisible. We speak of families. So children are completely invisible. And this is the importance of bringing children at the fore of this huge concern and worry, is because, as everyone is saying, there is, you just said it, consequences. Yes, not addressing child poverty. It has a multiplier, measuring effect from one generation to another. And we need to break the cycles of the disadvantage by investing in children. If we invest in children, we are investing in our present, but we're investing in tomorrow's leaders. And I went even further than just the early years. We need to tackle poverty if we really want to break the cycles of disadvantage from the maternity stage. There we can have, it's a window of opportunity, I would say, to address that vulnerability at that very, very early stage. And the child guarantee, which is basically based on, I would say, five pillars. It's the early years, development and care. We're speaking of education, we're speaking of health, we're speaking of even housing and nutrition. And the child guarantee on its own I mean, there has been this historic, it is a historic moment on the 14th of June when the Council recommendation was actually approved for a child guarantee. But, and I must commend this commission, to be honest, because it's the first time in history of the European Union that we have a child guarantee, we have a new strategy on the rights of the child, etc. So there is visibility. But now we need the necessary action plans, which we hope we can see them through by March of next year. And that is also not enough. We need the implementation of those action plans. And this is where we need to come together, even the church organizations, because civil society need to monitor on the ground what is happening. There is the money, and we must encourage even all governments to continue to invest, not just with the extra ESF plus the commitment on the take-up from the ESF plus fund, but even more, so that we can address not just the 5 million. The 5 million, it's, you know, the tip of the iceberg, when we know there are so many other millions left complete, I mean, will be left outside. So yes, we need to be together, civil society and all stakeholders, but also children. As we here, amongst us, we had, I am very grateful for our friends who came and gave testimony what it means to be poor, what it means to feel undignified, excluded and everything. We need also children to come to the table, participate, create a safe space for them so that we can understand, because children are the experts on their own aspirations.
Thank you so much for this word. I think it is indeed very important to listen also to the voices of children in the context of tackling poverty, hearing them better. Thank you to all our speakers for presenting your perspectives today. I'm afraid we will have to close the meeting now because we are already a bit over time. So thank you, dear speakers, dear participants, for joining us today at this webinar. We will be in touch with you. We will send you again our statements on poverty, which you may read. If you have other comments or questions you did not have time to raise during this event, please get in touch with me directly. We will look at that. And yes, so thank you very much and have a pleasant evening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So Alex has been thanking everybody, and we must thank.
Yeah.
Of course, with a huge applause.